My son-in-law threw me out of the house I had built with my own hands, right after my daughter's funeral. He shouted that I should get lost, saying this place was his. My clothes were dumped on the street, scattered in the dirt like trash. The next day, an envelope arrived. When he opened it, he realized that there was nothing left to undo. If you want to see how this plays out, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. 3 days had passed since we lowered Celeste into the ground. 3 days since I'd watched dirt cover the casket that held what remained of my only child. Now I stood on the sidewalk outside the house I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago, watching Orion throw my belongings through the front door like garbage. The November wind cut through my thin jacket, but the cold inside me ran deeper than any weather could reach. My knees creaked as I bent to pick up a blue flannel shirt from the gutter. Celeste had worn this when she was 16, sneaking out to meet her first boyfriend. I'd pretended not to notice when she climbed back through her bedroom window at 2 a.m, leaves in her hair and happiness glowing on her face. The fabric still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent she always used, even after all these years. Now it lay in a puddle of motor oil, the memory stained black. Behind curtains up and down the street, I could feel neighbors watching. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down had brought casseroles when Celeste was sick. Tom from across the way had helped me install the wheelchair ramp just 6 months ago. None of them came out now. Death makes people uncomfortable, but family ugliness makes them disappear entirely. I understood. This wasn't their fight, even if the man destroying my life was doing it in broad daylight. The front door slammed open again. Orion stood there in his expensive suit, the one he'd worn to the funeral, though he'd already removed the black armband. His face was red, not from grief, but from the effort of hauling boxes down the stairs. At 35, he still had the build of someone who spent more time at bars than gyms, soft around the middle, but with arms that could do damage when motivated by greed. He threw another box onto the lawn. Photo albums spilled out. Decades of Christmas mornings and birthday parties scattered across dead grass. One album fell open to a page I recognized immediately. There was Celeste, at 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, holding a puppy we'd named Lucky. In the corner of that photo, barely visible, was another image I'd tucked behind the plastic sheet years ago. The edges were yellowed and the image was blurry, but I knew what it showed. My hand moved involuntarily toward it, then stopped. Not yet. "This is all legal, old man," Orion called out, waving a manila folder in the air. "She signed everything over to me. The house, the savings, all of it. You got nothing coming to you." His voice carried down the street, and I saw Mrs. Henderson's curtain twitch closed. He wanted witnesses to his victory. What he didn't realize was that I wanted them too. The paper in his hand might have Celeste's signature, but I knew my daughter's handwriting better than my own. The loops were wrong, the slant too aggressive. She'd been right-handed until the accident 5 years ago. After that, after what he'd done to her spine, she'd had to learn to write with her left hand. The signature on that document was too smooth, too practiced. It was made by someone who'd never had to relearn how to hold a pen through tears of frustration and pain. Orion stepped back inside, and I heard the locks turning. Not just the deadbolt, but the chain, too. And then the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The hallway table, probably, the one Celeste's mother had left us before she passed. He was barricading himself inside my home like it was a fortress he'd conquered. I gathered what I could carry. The photo albums were too damaged, pages stuck together with street grime. But I took them anyway. My clothes could be replaced. The small wooden box that had rolled under a parked car, though, was different. It was painted black, no bigger than a shoebox, with Lucky's name carved into the lid in a child's uneven letters. Celeste had made it in a wood shop when she was 12, a coffin for our old dog. We'd buried it together in the backyard, under the oak tree, filling it with Lucky's collar and favorite toy. I knew we'd buried something else in there too, though I hadn't thought about it in years. Not until 3 days ago, when my phone buzzed with a message from Celeste's number, sent somehow after she'd already passed. The text was simple, just 7 words that made my hands shake. Dad, remember where we buried Lucky together? The weight of the box felt heavier than it should as I walked away from my home. Behind me, I heard Orion shouting something about calling the police if I came back, his voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction that comes from believing you've won everything. I didn't turn around. Instead, I found myself looking toward the end of the street, where the old Catholic church stood against the gray sky. Orion had parked his BMW in front of it, like he did every Sunday, but I noticed he'd chosen the spot farthest from the entrance. Even from here, I could see him glance nervously at the church doors before getting back to his gloating. The motel room I rented was $12 an hour or $40 for the night, cash only, no questions asked. The kind of place where the carpet stuck to your shoes and the air smelled like cigarettes that had been smoked when Reagan was president. I sat on the bed, springs groaning under my weight, and carefully pried open Lucky's box. Inside, beneath a layer of dirt and decay, wrapped in plastic that had somehow held up over the decades, was a USB drive. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my ancient laptop. The screen flickered to life, and there was my daughter's face, thin and pale, but with eyes that blazed with the kind of clarity that only comes when you know time is running out. The timestamp showed she'd recorded this 2 weeks ago, the same day Orion had increased her morphine dose against the doctor's recommendations. She looked directly at the camera, at me, and began to speak in a voice I thought I'd never hear again. But what she said, what she revealed in those first 30 seconds, made me understand that everything I thought I knew about my daughter's death was only the beginning. She mentioned someone who would come to find me, someone I needed to wait for, but she wouldn't say who. She only said I'd know them by their eyes, the same unusual color as hers, and that they would arrive only after Orion showed his true nature to the world. The video cut off abruptly, but there were more files on the drive. Medical records, bank statements, photos I'd never seen before, and at the very bottom of the file list, a document titled, "For Dad When He Locks You Out." I clicked on it, and the first line made my blood run cold. It was dated 17 years ago, when Celeste was barely 18, and it began with words that changed everything. The motel room suddenly felt too small, the walls too thin. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance, the sound of the city carrying on as if my world hadn't just tilted off its axis. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone, then stopped. Not yet. Celeste had planned this, planned all of it, and I needed to trust her timing. Tomorrow would bring what tomorrow would bring. The USB drive sat on the nightstand like a loaded gun, its small red light blinking in the darkness of the motel room. I'd watched Celeste's video 14 times throughout the night, memorizing every word, every gesture, every labored breath she took between sentences. The morphine had been clouding her mind, she said, but in those rare moments of clarity, she'd managed to record everything. Orion had been controlling her medication, keeping her dosed just high enough that she couldn't speak clearly to visitors, but not so high that the nurses would notice. The perfect balance of cruelty and calculation. Morning came with the sound of someone pounding on the door next to mine, screaming about money owed. I dressed in yesterday's clothes, the ones that still smelled like the street in front of my stolen home, and opened my laptop again. The file marked, "For Dad When He Locks You Out," contained more than just words. It contained evidence that Celeste had been gathering for 5 years, ever since the night Orion came home with blood on his bumper and wine on his breath, the night my daughter's spine was shattered in 3 places. She'd never told me it was him driving, The police report listed it as a hit and run, unknown vehicle, no witnesses. But Celeste knew. She'd been conscious for those 30 seconds before the pain took her under, long enough to see her husband stumble out of the car, look at her broken body, and get back into park the BMW in the garage. He'd called the ambulance from inside the house, claiming he'd heard a crash and found her in the driveway. The neighbors had praised him for his quick thinking. The doctors had called him devoted when he never left her bedside during that first critical week. The photos on the USB showed the truth. Celeste had hired someone, paid them from a secret account she'd opened using money inherited from her mother. Money Orion never knew existed. The investigator had found the body shop in Newark, where Orion had the car repaired the next day, paying cash, claiming he'd hit a deer. They'd found the mechanic who'd done the work, taken photos of the invoice, the damage pattern that matched a human impact perfectly. They'd even found security footage from a liquor store showing Orion buying 3 bottles of wine 2 hours before the accident, his 4th stop of the evening. My hands shook as I scrolled through page after page of evidence. Medical records showing the progression of Celeste's paralysis, how it could have been prevented with proper immediate treatment instead of the 30-minute delay while Orion crafted his story. Bank statements showing large cash withdrawals the days after each of her surgeries, money that never went toward her care. And then, at the bottom of everything, a folder simply labeled with a date from 17 years ago. Inside was a single photo that made me set the laptop aside and walk to the bathroom, where I threw up until my stomach was empty and my throat burned with acid. The photo showed Celeste at barely 18, holding a baby, standing next to a woman I'd never seen before. The baby had her mother's eyes, that unusual shade of blue that looked almost purple in certain light. The same eyes Celeste had inherited from her grandmother. The woman beside them was signing papers, adoption papers, and in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the date stamp. The baby would be 17 now, almost an adult. And somewhere out there, if Celeste's plan was what I thought it was, that child was waiting for the right moment to appear. I drove to the pharmacy where Celeste had filled her prescriptions, the laptop hidden under the spare tire in my truck. The pharmacist, a young man with tired eyes and careful hands, recognized me immediately. He'd been the one to question Orion's requests for early refills, to raise concerns about the dosage increases. But Orion had produced documents, signatures from doctors who, I learned from a quick search, had surprisingly empty online presences and disconnected phone numbers. "Mr. Thaddeus," the pharmacist said quietly, glancing around the empty store. "I'm sorry about Celeste. I thought something wasn't right, but he had all the paperwork." I showed him the USB drive without explaining what was on it. His face went pale when he saw it, and he reached under the counter, pulling out a manila envelope with my name written on it in Celeste's shaky left-handed script. "She asked me to give this to you if you came in alone," he said. "Made me promise not to open it, not to give it to anyone else, especially not her husband." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "She said to tell you the morphine wasn't just for pain. Said you'd understand what that meant." Inside the envelope were prescription records going back 5 years, but these weren't the official ones. These were handwritten notes the pharmacist had kept, documenting every time Orion had come in, every conversation, every threat he'd made when questioned about the increasing doses. At the bottom was a business card for a doctor I recognized, Celeste's childhood physician who'd retired to Florida 3 years ago. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "Never authorized increased dosage. Someone forged my signature. Kept copies." The pieces were falling into place like dominoes lined up years in advance. Celeste hadn't just been gathering evidence, she'd been building a network. People who knew fragments of the truth, waiting for someone to connect them all. And she'd known, somehow, that Orion would lock me out, that his greed would override his caution, that he'd make his move too soon. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching the rain start to fall, and thought about my daughter's mind. Even broken, even drugged, even dying, she'd been 3 steps ahead of everyone. The USB wasn't just evidence, it was bait. The prescription records weren't just proof, they were breadcrumbs. And somewhere out there, a 17-year-old with purple-blue eyes was waiting for their cue to enter the stage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just an address, nothing else. I recognized the street, a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town, where the houses were small but well kept, where families raised children, and nobody asked too many questions. I drove there through the rain, the wipers beating a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The house was painted yellow with white trim, flowers in the window boxes despite the November cold. I parked across the street and waited, not sure what I was waiting for until the front door opened. A woman stepped out, middle-aged, brown hair streaked with gray, wearing nurse's scrubs. She walked to her mailbox, looked directly at me, and nodded once before going back inside. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo, taken from inside that yellow house. It showed a teenager's bedroom, neat and organized, with textbooks stacked on a desk and a bulletin board covered in academic awards. But what made my breath catch was the photo tucked into the corner of the mirror. It was Celeste at 18, the same age as in the hidden photo, standing in front of a hospital, smiling despite everything that had happened to her. The text that followed the photo was simple. "She's been waiting to meet her grandfather. Celeste said you'd come when the locks changed." I thought about going to the door, introducing myself, meeting this granddaughter I never knew existed. But something held me back. Some instinct that said it wasn't time yet. Celeste had planned this too carefully for me to rush it now. Instead, I drove back to the motel, my mind racing with possibilities. That evening, I got another message, this time from a number I recognized. It was from someone at the church, one of the volunteers who helped with the funeral. The message was brief, but urgent. "Orion's been asking about church records from 17 years ago. Father Zephyr wants to speak with you." The name stopped me cold. Zephyr. Not a common name, certainly not one I'd heard at our church before, but I remembered now, dimly, Celeste mentioning someone named Zephyr years ago, back when she first started dating Orion. His best friend from college, she'd said, though they'd had some kind of falling out. The friend had joined the priesthood afterward and disappeared from their lives completely. The USB drive held more than evidence, I realized. It held connections, a web of people Celeste had slowly brought together, each holding a piece of the puzzle. The pharmacist with his records, the doctor with his proof of forgery, the woman raising my granddaughter in secret, and now a priest who used to know Orion better than anyone. I looked at the photo album I'd saved from the street, still damp and stinking of motor oil. The blurry photo I'd hidden so many years ago was still there, tucked behind the plastic. But now I could see what I'd missed before. In the background, barely visible, was a young man in a hospital volunteer uniform. His name tag was too small to read, but I knew now who it must be. Zephyr, back before he found God, back when he was still Orion's friend, witnessing something that would eventually drive him to seek forgiveness in the priesthood. Tomorrow, I will go to church. Tomorrow I would meet this priest who held another piece of my daughter's carefully constructed puzzle. But tonight, I sat in that grimy motel room and opened the laptop again. There was one more file I hadn't had the courage to open yet, labeled simply, Mom's Last Words. I clicked on it, and Celeste's voice filled the room one more time, weaker than in the other videos, but somehow stronger too. She was telling me about the night her daughter was born, about the decision to give her up, about the couple she'd chosen to raise her. She was telling me about Orion's reaction when she'd mentioned wanting children years later, the rage that had flickered across his face before he covered it with a smile. She was telling me about the accident, about those 30 seconds of consciousness when she'd seen exactly who her husband really was. But most of all, she was telling me about forgiveness. Not for Orion, never for him, but for herself, for me, for the choices we'd all made that had led to this moment. She said she wasn't afraid to die, knowing that she'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, knowing that the truth would come out in a way that Orion would never see coming. The video ended with her looking directly at the camera, that purple-blue gaze still sharp despite the drugs, and saying words that would echo in my mind for days to come. Dad, when she finds you, and she will find you, remember that she's not just my daughter. She's my justice. The doorbell at 7 in the morning wasn't a sound I expected in this motel. Most people here knew better than to announce themselves. I opened the door to find a teenage girl standing in the hallway, her hood pulled up against the morning cold, but not enough to hide those eyes. Purple-blue, just like her mother's, just like the grandmother she'd never met. She didn't smile, didn't introduce herself, just held out a wooden box painted black, identical to the one I'd found the USB in. "You're Thaddeus," she said, not a question. Her voice had Celeste's cadence, that careful way of speaking that made every word count. "Mom said you'd be here. Said you'd be holding Lucky's box when I found you." I looked down at my hands. I hadn't realized I'd been carrying it when I answered the door. But there it was, clutched against my chest like a life preserver. The girl stepped past me into the room without invitation, moving with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled back her hood, revealing red hair that caught the light streaming through the dirty window. Not Celeste's dark brown, but her grandmother's auburn, the color Celeste's mother had passed down through genes that skipped a generation. "My name is Indigo," she said, opening the box she'd brought. "But you probably figured that out from Mom's videos. She said you were smart, said you'd piece it together before I got here." She pulled out a stack of documents, each one sealed in plastic, each one labeled with dates going back 17 years. "These are the originals. Mom kept copies, but she wanted you to have these." The revelation that the young woman, Indigo, was my granddaughter struck me with physical force. She was the daughter of my daughter Celeste, the baby from a blurry photograph I had kept without understanding its significance. In her features, I saw a living history of our family, my wife's nose, my father's jaw, and Celeste's spirit in everything else. With practiced efficiency, Indigo laid out the proof on the bed: birth certificates, adoption papers, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in Celeste's youthful handwriting. The letter had been written 17 years ago, 3 days after Indigo's birth, and kept in waiting for this exact moment. Indigo confirmed my unspoken thought. Celeste had planned every detail, knowing her husband, Orion, would reveal his true nature after her death, and that we would need each other to finish her work. With trembling hands, I opened the 17-year-old letter. Celeste's voice emerged from the pages, recounting the story of a hidden pregnancy with a young man who died in Afghanistan before knowing he would be a father. She wrote of her decision to give the baby to a trusted couple, structuring the adoption to allow her to watch her daughter grow from a distance. The letter then shifted to her life with Orion, detailing his initial charm and the slow, insidious reveal of his darkness through a series of escalating accidents. A fall down the stairs, a sudden allergic reaction, a near-fatal carbon monoxide leak in the garage. These were not mishaps, but calculated acts of cruelty that chipped away at her safety and spirit long before his final, successful attempt to incapacitate her. The most critical revelation came in the letter's final paragraph. Celeste had been meticulously building a case against Orion for years, even before the car accident that left her paralyzed. She had documented his abuse, preparing to expose him and escape. The accident was not the beginning of his attempts to kill her, but merely the one that succeeded in trapping her in her own body. From the confines of her wheelchair, a prison of broken bones and damaged nerves, her mission did not end. Instead, her resolve hardened. Knowing she would not live to see justice, she spent her remaining years transforming her pain into a complex, posthumous plan designed to ensure that someone else would. Remembering Celeste's cryptic message, I realized that Orion changing the locks on my house was the signal she had planned for. Indigo confirmed this with security footage on her phone, showing Orion laughing with a locksmith just hours after he had thrown me out. This arrogant act of possession was his undoing, unknowingly triggering the next phase of Celeste's strategy. Indigo then presented another discovery. Orion's first wife, whom he claimed had died in a car accident 10 years prior, was still alive. She was in a long-term care facility, comatose since her own accident, while Orion had been collecting her life insurance for a decade. The pattern was horrifyingly clear, and Celeste, from her deathbed, had found a way to bring it all to light. Our next step was already laid out. Indigo informed me of an appointment at a nearby church with a Father Zephyr, who held another piece of her mother's plan, which could only be retrieved after the locks were changed. As I gathered the boxes of evidence, I observed my granddaughter. The way she moved, constantly aware of her surroundings, made it clear that her adoptive parents had done more than just raise her. They had trained her. For 17 years, she had been prepared for this moment, not as a grieving child, but as a focused and capable instrument of her mother's will. She was a weapon aimed directly at the man who had destroyed her mother's life. And her fight was just beginning. As we drove toward the church, I asked about her adoptive parents, the ones who raised her. Indigo confirmed that they knew everything. Her mother had chosen them because the adoptive mother had lost a daughter to domestic violence. She understood the nature of this fight. They had raised Indigo with the knowledge that one day she would have to face Orion, to be strong enough to stand up to him in ways Celeste couldn't from her wheelchair. All her life, Indigo had been preparing for this moment, turning her mother's pain into her own purpose. The church parking lot was empty, except for a BMW that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. It was Orion's car. He was here, probably trying to convince Father Zephyr to destroy any records he thought might exist from 17 years ago. What Orion didn't know was that Father Zephyr had been waiting for him, a part of Celeste's plan from the beginning, holding the most damning evidence of all. Indigo reassured me, her hand on my arm a painfully familiar echo of Celeste. She said her mother had predicted he would come here, rushing to clean up loose ends as soon as he thought he'd won. We entered through a side door, moving silently through halls I had walked for 40 years. I could hear voices from the main sanctuary, Orion's rising in anger, another man's calm and measured. Indigo whispered that this was our cue, then pushed the door open. The sanctuary was filled with morning light streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. Orion stood near the altar, his back to us, gesturing wildly at a man in priest's robes. Father Zephyr, younger than I expected, perhaps around 40, had a face that seemed to have seen too much too soon. When he saw us, his expression shifted, a mix of relief and resolve. He announced to Orion that his answer had just walked in. Orion spun around, his face turning from red to white. He looked at me, then at Indigo, and I saw recognition hit him like a physical blow. He saw Celeste in her, saw the eyes he'd stared into as he left her broken on the driveway. He stammered that it was impossible, that Celeste had said there was no child. Indigo calmly replied that her mother had lied to protect her from him. She had spent 17 years ensuring that when he finally showed his true face, she would be there for everyone to see it. Father Zephyr moved to a table beside the altar, picking up a black wooden box identical to the ones we carried. He explained that Celeste had left it with him 2 weeks ago, with instructions to open it only when 3 conditions were met: her death, the changing of the locks, and the arrival of her father and daughter together. He confirmed that all 3 conditions had now been met. Inside the box was a USB drive and a single, ornate key for a bank-safe deposit box. Orion's face turned a shade of gray as he recognized it. He insisted he had the only key and had cleaned out that box years ago. Father Zephyr calmly corrected him, stating that he had cleaned out box 247, while Celeste owned box 248, right next to it. For 5 years, she had watched him make deposits, documenting every dollar he stole, every document he forged. A month ago, when he thought she was too drugged to move, Father Zephyr himself had wheeled her to the bank. They had copied everything in his box, every piece of evidence he thought he had hidden. Orion lunged toward the priest, but I stepped between them, pushing him back. He stumbled, surprised by the strength from a man my age. But 40 years in construction and the weight of grief had turned my muscles to iron. I warned him not to touch anyone in this church ever again. He looked around wildly for an escape, but Indigo blocked the main door, and Father Zephyr stood firm by the altar. He was trapped. Orion tried to argue that no one would believe a dying, drugged woman, but Father Zephyr cut him off. The priest revealed he had a tape recording of Orion's confession from 10 years ago, after his first wife's accident. He had begged the priest to keep it secret. Now the seal of confession was broken because the safety of others was at stake. Indigo added that her mother had left dozens of letters with every neighbor, friend, and business associate. Those letters were dated for today. This morning, while he was here trying to cover his tracks, they all opened their mail and learned what he had done. Silence filled the sacred space as the truth was finally laid bare. Orion's legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees on the very spot where he had married my daughter 20 years ago. But this was not repentance. It was defeat. I looked down at him and said he had killed her twice, once with the car, once with the morphine. But she had beaten him both times. The first time by surviving long enough to plan this, and the second by ensuring her death would be his undoing. Father Zephyr took out his phone and quietly called someone, giving our location and requesting immediate assistance. Through the windows, I saw cars beginning to arrive in the parking lot. They weren't police cars, but the vehicles of neighbors and friends of Celeste. A whole community she had secretly mobilized for this moment. They entered silently, filling the pews as if for a service. Mrs. Henderson, Tom from across the street, the pharmacist, the nurse who had cared for Celeste. Dozens of people, all holding envelopes they had opened that morning, all carrying pieces of the truth Celeste had sown. They had come to bear witness, turning the church into a court of conscience. Orion looked at the crowd, at the faces that had smiled at him for years, and realized there was nowhere left to hide. Then we heard the sirens, growing closer, converging on the church. Indigo smiled, a smile so much like her mother's. She explained it was Celeste's final gift. Her mother knew he had been defrauding his client's medical insurance claims, a federal crime. The FBI had been building a case for 2 years, waiting for her signal. The changing of the locks was that signal. Celeste had not only orchestrated his social and moral downfall, she had arranged his legal demise with unerring precision, ensuring that every door to his freedom was locked tight. The church doors opened, and men in dark suits entered, their badges gleaming in the morning light. They moved with purpose, surrounding Orion, reading him his rights while the community watched. As they lifted him to his feet, his eyes met mine one last time, and I saw the truth he'd finally understood. Celeste hadn't just outsmarted him. She'd orchestrated his complete destruction from her deathbed, turning his own cruelty into the weapon that would destroy him. As they led him away, Father Zephyr placed a hand on my shoulder. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "Something Celeste wanted you to see. It's in my office." But before we could move, Orion broke free from the agent's grip, not to run but to lunge at Indigo. His hands reached for her throat, murder in his eyes, the final act of a desperate man. But Indigo didn't flinch. She stepped aside with practiced ease, and Orion crashed into the altar, his head striking the marble with a sound like a lock clicking shut. He crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring at nothing. The FBI agents rushed forward, medics were called, but I could tell it was too late. Orion was gone, killed by his own violence in the place he'd feared most, surrounded by the truth he'd tried so hard to hide. It was not the justice Celeste had planned, but perhaps it was the justice she'd foreseen. After all, she'd known him better than anyone. "Every lock has a key," Indigo said quietly, looking at her biological father's still form. "But some locks are meant to stay closed forever. The silence after violence has its own weight." I stood in that sanctuary watching the FBI agents work around Orion's body, feeling Indigo's steady breathing beside me. She hadn't moved since he'd lunged at her, since she'd stepped aside and let him destroy himself against the altar. Father Zephyr broke the silence first. "Everyone, please move to the fellowship hall. The authorities need space." People filed out quietly. As the church emptied, one of the FBI agents approached me. She was older, maybe 50, with gray streaking through black hair. "Mr. Thaddeus, I'm the agent in charge. We've been investigating your son-in-law for 26 months. Your daughter was our informant." The words hit like cold water. Celeste hadn't just been gathering evidence. She'd been feeding it to the FBI from her wheelchair. "She contacted us about insurance fraud," the agent continued. "But there was more. Multiple schemes across state lines. Your daughter gave us everything." She paused, looking at the blood being cleaned from the floor. "We were going to arrest him today. Your daughter timed it perfectly. His other properties," I said, the words feeling foreign. The agent exchanged a look with Father Zephyr. "Perhaps we should continue in my office?" the priest suggested. In the cramped office, Father Zephyr moved aside a portrait revealing a safe. Inside were folders and Celeste's old laptop. He handed me the first folder. "This is about his first wife," he said quietly. "Your daughter found her 2 years ago. The medical records showed a woman in a coma for 10 years, injuries matching Celeste's exactly. Insurance policies totaling $12 million. Orion had been collecting while keeping her on life support. He planned to end her life support next month," Father Zephyr said. "The legal 10-year mark. Celeste found out and made sure he'd never get the chance." The second folder contained property deeds. 3 houses bought with stolen money. The laptop held videos of Celeste, dozens of them, talking to me about memories, about Indigo, about what mattered. The last video was different. Dated the day before she died, Celeste looked directly at the camera. "Dad, by the time you see this, Orion will be gone. Indigo will be with you. Take care of each other." She held up a small box. "This is my real will. Zephyr will give it to you after." Inside the box was a key and a brief note. "Storage Unit 47 on Maple Street. Everything I wanted to preserve is there. Show Indigo where she came from." "There's something else," Father Zephyr said. He pulled up files on his computer. "Celeste arranged for evidence to be released publicly once Orion was gone. It's uploading now." Within minutes, phones began ringing. The media had the story. We slipped out the back as news vans arrived. At the storage unit, we found boxes of family history, photos Orion never saw, videos from before the accident. In the center sat a wheelchair painted with flowers and birds, dressed with Celeste's favorite outfit. Hours passed as we went through memories. Then my phone buzzed. Father Zephyr had sent a photo of the church's stained glass window. In the afternoon light, words appeared that Celeste had inscribed years ago. Every lock opens to the right key. The storage unit had one last surprise. A computer in the corner, already connected to a video call. On screen was a woman in a hospital bed. The first wife, conscious. "Hello," she said, her voice rough but real. "Celeste said you'd come today." The first wife's eyes were sharp despite her decade in limbo. Through the screen I could see machines surrounding her bed. But she was fully conscious, fully present. "I woke up 3 weeks ago," she said, each word requiring effort. "The same day Celeste died. Your daughter had been visiting me for 2 years, talking to me. I could hear every word." Indigo moved closer to the screen. The storage unit felt smaller as we listened to this woman who'd survived what Celeste hadn't. She continued between mechanical breaths. "Celeste found me through records Orion thought he'd destroyed. She came with a priest named Zephyr. They planned everything while Orion collected my insurance money." Behind her, someone moved into view. A teenage girl who looked exactly like the first wife must have looked before. "This is my daughter," the woman said. "She was 7 when Orion tried to kill me. He told her I'd abandoned them." The daughter spoke directly to the camera. "I found out the truth 2 years ago. Celeste contacted me through my school. She showed me evidence, introduced me to my real mother through video. I've been recording everything Orion did while raising me." The first wife shifted slightly. "There's something Celeste made me promise to reveal only after Orion was gone." Her daughter pulled up an image on a tablet. A medical license. Orion had a partner, his college roommate, a doctor who's been treating Celeste for 5 years. The photo showed a man I recognized but couldn't place until the daughter said his name. Celeste's neurologist. The one with complete access to her care. "They've been doing this together for 15 years, the first wife explained. "The doctor identifies patients with good insurance, Orion marries them, then—" Indigo's hand found mine. "Mom knew. That's why she involved the FBI, why she made everything public. She knew Orion's death wouldn't be enough." The first wife nodded weakly. "The doctor has a flight booked for tonight. Fake passport, offshore accounts." But Celeste anticipated this. Her daughter held up another black box. "This was delivered to the FBI an hour ago. Everything they need to arrest him, plus a confession he made 5 years ago at a conference, recorded by an undercover agent Celeste hired." "There's more," the first wife said, strength fading. "The house you were locked out of will become a training center. A place where women learn to recognize predators, gather evidence safely. Indigo has plans." Indigo pulled out a folder from the boxes. Architectural drawings, business plans, a foundation in Celeste's name. $40 million, siphoned from Orion's illegal accounts over 3 years. "She called it the Lock and Key Foundation," Indigo read. "She wanted me to run it, with you and the first wife as directors." The first wife's breathing became labored. Her daughter adjusted the oxygen. "I need to rest, but there's one last thing. The doctor doesn't know I'm awake. He's coming here tonight to finish what Orion started. The FBI will be waiting. Celeste wanted you to see the last piece fall." The call ended. We sat surrounded by preserved memories, and I knew what we had to do. "We're going to New Jersey," I said. "We're going to watch him fail. Then we're going to build what Celeste envisioned." Indigo pulled out her phone. "There's one more recording. Mom made it for this exact moment." Celeste appeared on screen, healthier than in recent videos. "Dad, if you're watching this, you know about the doctor, about everything. I'm proud of you. Take our pain and help Indigo turn it into purpose." We loaded everything important into my truck. As we drove toward New Jersey, I thought about how Celeste had turned metaphor into method. Every lock Orion tried to close, she'd found a key to open. The hospital parking lot had unmarked FBI vans. Inside, the first wife was pretending to be comatose while a trap waited for spring. I walked to the hospital chapel and lit 3 candles. One for Celeste, one for the first wife, one for all the unknown victims. From somewhere above, an alarm began to sound. The doctor had arrived early. The hospital corridor stretched before us, a sterile tunnel toward a confrontation orchestrated from beyond the grave. Following a special agent, Indigo and I moved through hallways that reeked of disinfectant, our footsteps the only sound in the tense quiet. Behind us, a silent FBI team formed a comforting yet ominous procession. We were approaching the final act of Celeste's Symphony of Justice. Patricia's room was a corner unit on the 3rd floor, its windows overlooking the lot where Dr. Marcus, her husband's accomplice, had just arrived. Surveillance showed him retrieving a medical bag from his trunk, a bag we knew contained enough potassium chloride to induce a fatal and seemingly natural cardiac arrest. He was attempting the perfect murder on a woman he believed had been in a coma for a decade, unaware she was now the conscious bait in a federal sting. The agent monitored his progress, whispering that he was taking the stairs to avoid being seen. Inside the room, Patricia's daughter maintained a facade of calm, a mask for the fury she had cultivated for 2 years while documenting her stepfather's crimes. By the bed, Patricia herself lay perfectly still, the rhythmic pulse of her life support machines belying the tension in her hands. She was a mirror of Celeste, feigning weakness while maneuvering the architect of her demise into an inescapable trap. At the agent's quiet command, the FBI team melted into adjoining rooms. Indigo and I took our positions in an observation room next door, watching through one-way glass. This entire setup, from the room selection to the timing, was part of Celeste's meticulous posthumous design, a stage set for a killer's final performance. Dr. Marcus entered with an air of unearned confidence, his pleasant, forgettable face the perfect disguise for a monster. Dressed in scrubs and a white coat, he looked every bit the concerned physician. The daughter looked up, her expression a careful balance of grief and fear that I recognized from Celeste. She explained her presence as a need for comfort following her stepfather Orion's recent death. Marcus moved to the bedside, his movements practiced as he checked monitors, all while covertly assessing the room for witnesses. He failed to notice the miniature cameras and microphones hidden in the equipment, broadcasting his every word and action. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his performance was being recorded for a federal audience, a jury that had already convicted him. He pulled on latex gloves and spoke of Patricia's condition with a chillingly false compassion. He suggested that, with her husband now gone, it was perhaps time to let her go, to allow nature to take its course. The profound irony of his words, spoken as he prepared to commit murder, hung heavy in the air. From his medical bag, he withdrew a syringe filled with clear fluid, his movements betraying a familiarity with the act that was deeply disturbing. The daughter, her voice remarkably steady, countered by suggesting a transfer to a facility with experimental treatments, a final conversational gambit. Marcus dismissed the idea with medical authority, insisting her mother's brain damage was irreversible. He was just inches from the IV port when Patricia opened her eyes. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Marcus stumbled back, the syringe clattering to the floor from his nerveless grasp, his face draining of all color. Patricia's gaze was unwavering and filled with a decade of silent accusation. She could not yet speak, but her eyes communicated everything. She had heard him plan her murder. She knew what he had done to her, and his time was over. In that moment of dawning horror, the predator recognized the trap. Before he could react, The adjoining doors burst open and FBI agents swarmed the room, their weapons drawn. He collapsed to the ground without resistance, the pleasant mask finally falling away to reveal the monster beneath, as the agent read him his rights. In the hospital room, the final pieces of Celeste's plan fell into place. As agents led the doctor, Marcus, away, his accomplice Patricia, long believed to be in a coma, proved to be the final witness. With a surge of strength that defied a decade of paralysis, she pulled the ventilator from her throat to deliver a chilling message from my deceased daughter, Celeste, confirming that the door to his prison cell should never be opened. Later, in the quiet relief of the room, Patricia revealed another of Celeste's arrangements. Her daughter produced a small wooden box containing a video message. On screen, a healthy Celeste from 6 years prior explained that their survival was the only victory that mattered, urging them to transform their pain into purpose. Her message continued, offering personal words of love that forged our shared trauma into a bond of strength. Afterward, the conversation turned to the future and the lock and key foundation Celeste had envisioned. The scale of her planning became clear when we saw a bank statement revealing a starting capital of over $60 million, funds recovered from the criminals who had wronged us. It was enough to create a network of sanctuaries for others. Later, Indigo and I left the hospital, avoiding the media circus. On the drive to my house, which had been stolen from me just days before, I explained that Celeste hadn't controlled every detail, but had simply understood people and created opportunities for justice, trusting us to act. Upon arriving, we found the front door open, with the guardian who raised Indigo waiting inside. Celeste had given her a key years ago for this exact moment. Inside, a transformation was underway as volunteers removed the last traces of the previous occupants, turning the house back into a home. In Celeste's old room, I found one last box containing a locket with GPS coordinates. The next day, we followed them to a spot 17 feet from Celeste's grave, where we unearthed a cedar box. Inside was a final letter and an audio recorder. The letter revealed the full extent of Celeste's fight. She had suspected her husband Orion was a killer from their third date, and had married him to stop him. The letter also exposed hidden Swiss bank accounts filled with stolen money, and revealed that the lead FBI agent was a relative Celeste had recruited years ago. The accompanying audio recording contained a message of hope, with Celeste's strong voice declaring that survival is possible, and the greatest revenge is refusing to be broken. That afternoon, we officially opened the Lock and Key Foundation in that very house, transforming a place of suffering into a sanctuary. When we played the recording, hundreds of survivors who had gathered repeated her words, turning their collective pain into a promise of a better future. The healing had finally begun, all according to Celeste's brilliant design. As the sun set, I found one last box from Celeste. Inside was a photo of her holding a positive pregnancy test, taken just before the accident that paralyzed her. A note on the back revealed the final, most stunning secret. She was pregnant when her husband attacked her, and she had delivered the baby in secret. Indigo had a sister named Hope, hidden safely in Oregon. 1 year later, Hope came home, and the foundation had saved over 300 women. I stood in the house, now a place of healing, and finally understood the full scope of my daughter's plan. She had not orchestrated a revenge plot. She had created a path to redemption, not by destroying one man, but by saving everyone he ever could have harmed. Every lock has a key. Sometimes that key is simply refusing to stay broken. What would you do If someone took everything from you after your greatest loss, please feel free to share your story in the comment below.